Riker rips a waitress's shirt at a bar. The Marine Corps tattoo at her back made everyone freeze. A drunk harbor thug slammed his fist on the tavern counter. "You think you can just pour drinks here without paying respect?" He sneered at Claire, the quiet woman behind the bar. The fishermen shrank back into their seats, knowing the name Riker carried weight in these streets. But Claire didn't flinch. She only set down the glass she was drying and looked at him with eyes colder than the sea mist outside. No one in that tavern knew who she really was, or what she had once done. They only knew this. By dawn, the harbor would never be the same. The sound of glass shattering cut through the laughter. For a moment, everything inside Murphy's tavern went quiet. It was a Friday night in the small coastal town of Brookhaven, where most evenings ended with soft country music, spilled beer, and stories repeated 100 times before. The crowd had gathered as usual, dockworkers still in their heavy coats, fishermen smelling faintly of salt and diesel, and a few truckers with weathered caps pulled low. Nothing about tonight was supposed to be different. But then the glass broke, and silence fell. At the far end of the bar stood Claire Donovan, 31 years old, her frame slight, her hair pulled back into a plain bun. She wore the bar's uniform, black slacks and a white buttoned shirt rolled at the sleeves. Nothing about her spoke of strength or power. Everything about her whispered, ordinary, forgettable, weak. She bent down quietly to sweep up the fragments of the glass that had slipped from a patron's hand. Her movements were calm, deliberate. No rush, no fluster. Even in the hush that followed, she did not seem rattled. Just a woman cleaning a mess. But one detail stood out to anyone who looked close enough. Her hands. They were small, yes, but the tendons showed sharp beneath her skin, the knuckles rough, the scars faint but unmistakable. They were hands that had done hard work, not just carried trays and glasses. Few noticed. Fewer cared. At that moment, the door opened. The sound of boots on the old wooden floor echoed louder than they should have, as if the room had grown smaller. A man entered, tall and broad, leather vest heavy with patches, jeans faded and torn at the knees. His beard was thick, his eyes mean. Two others followed close behind, both younger, both grinning in that cruel way men do when they believe no one can stop them. The tavern's chatter did not resume. The regulars kept their heads down, hands curling around mugs, shoulders tight. They knew men like this. They had seen them before. Claire rose slowly, setting the dustpan aside. She looked at the newcomers only briefly, her expression calm, unreadable. Then she turned back to place the broom against the wall. The leader's gaze swept across the room and settled on her. He smirked. The atmosphere shifted, heavy now, as if the very air had thickened. The night of quiet stories and spilled beer was over. Something else had begun. The man's first words broke the silence, and with them, the challenge that would change everything. The man with the leather vest stepped further inside, his boots dragging grit across the old wood floor. His presence filled the room, not just with size, but with the force of someone used to getting their way. His name was Carl Riker, known in the county simply as Riker. He carried himself like a storm rolling into calm waters, daring anyone to stand in his path. He leaned one elbow on the bar and gave a smile that had no warmth. "Murphy," he said, voice gravel deep. "Time's up." Behind the counter, old Murphy Callahan stiffened. His white shirt was stained at the collar, sleeves rolled to his elbows. The bar was his life, and the way his hand trembled slightly against the counter told the truth. He already knew what was coming. "This place pays," Riker continued, "or this place burns. Simple as that." The words fell heavy. No one spoke. No one moved. Claire stood a few feet away, holding a tray at her side. She seemed, at first glance, untouched by the tension. Her eyes lowered, her shoulders easy. Just a waitress. Just another face. Riker's gaze flicked to her, and he chuckled. "What's this? Murphy hiring children now? You think she's going to protect you?" He turned his grin toward the crowd, seeking their laughter. A few gave nervous chuckles, not from amusement, but fear. Claire did not flinch. She set the tray quietly on the counter, her fingers releasing it with deliberate care. Then, she picked up a glass cloth and began to wipe the bar. No glance, no words, No sign she had even heard the insult. But there was something in the way she folded the cloth. Slow. Exact. Like every corner had to meet its match. Her movements spoke of precision, not servitude. A few eyes in the tavern caught it. Most looked away quickly, as though afraid to notice. Riker slammed his fist on the bar, jolting Murphy and making a glass rattle. "Don't ignore me," he barked. "I'm talking to you, girl." Claire set the cloth down. She looked up finally, meeting his eyes. Her expression was calm, even gentle. "Would you like a drink, sir?" The question was plain, polite, but the steadiness of her voice carried something beneath it, something immovable. For the first time, Riker's grin faltered, only for a breath. Then he leaned closer, eyes narrowing. The crowd felt the air tighten. Claire had not raised her voice, had not stood tall, but the choice she made in that moment, a refusal to be rattled, shifted the balance. Riker's hand moved suddenly, reaching not for his wallet but for her shirt collar, and with that, the fragile disguise she wore began to unravel. Riker's hand shot out, rough and sudden, catching the edge of Claire's collar. The crowd gasped. Chairs scraped the floor as men shifted but did not rise. Fear held them in place. The fabric tore with a sharp sound, the white shirt giving way under his grip. For an instant, Claire staggered back, her tray clattering to the ground. The room froze. On her upper back, between the torn folds of cotton, ink caught the dim yellow light of the tavern lamps. A tattoo, black, precise, unmistakable. The eagle, globe, and anchor of the United States Marine Corps. It wasn't a decoration. It was a mark earned in blood and fire. Riker's laughter stumbled into silence. His grip slackened, and his hand fell. He hadn't meant to reveal anything more than flesh. But what he had torn free was something older, heavier. Something the whole room recognized, though not all understood. Claire straightened slowly. Her collar hung torn, her shirt no longer neat. She did not move to cover the tattoo. Instead, she stood still, spine erect, as if the simple act of standing revealed more than words ever could. She said nothing. Inside, her thoughts pulled back to memories she rarely let surface. The old dog tags tucked deep in a small box beneath her bed. The folded flag resting in storage, given to her after Corporal Ruiz's funeral. The medals she had locked away years ago, never hung, never shone. She had promised herself she would live quietly. No uniforms, no stories, no reminders. The people of Brookhaven only knew her as the quiet waitress at Murphy's, always on time, always polite. Now, in one careless act, the wall she had built crumbled. Claire lowered her eyes, as though she could will the past back into hiding. But the weight of silence pressed on her. She could feel the stares. Some were wide-eyed with shock. Others, older men near the back, veterans themselves, looked at her with recognition. Her jaw tightened. The scar on her wrist, normally hidden by a sleeve, caught the light. The mark of shrapnel, from a place she had sworn to forget. Riker blinked, unsettled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. His bluster had been stripped away by something he hadn't expected, truth. Claire took a slow breath. Her hands rested calmly on the counter, though every muscle inside her remembered things this crowd could not imagine. The disguise was gone. The past had stepped into the room with her. All it would take was one voice, one witness, to name what that symbol on her back meant, and the power in the room would shift forever. The silence stretched long. It was not the easy quiet of men sipping beer. It was the heavy stillness before thunder breaks. Riker's hand hovered in midair, then fell back to his side. His eyes darted to the tattoo again, as though he doubted what he'd seen. His men behind him shifted, suddenly less certain of their leader. Someone in the crowd whispered, low but clear enough to travel, "That's Marine ink." The word struck harder than any fist. The spell of fear began to change shape. People who had seen Claire as nothing more than Murphy's waitress now looked again. Riker forced a laugh, too loud, too sharp. "What's a little drawing mean? Anybody can get a tattoo." He sneered, his bravado straining. "Doesn't make her dangerous." But the room no longer believed him. A fisherman at the back, gray hair, shoulders stooped, but eyes sharp, stood halfway from his chair. "That's not just any tattoo," he said. His voice carried weight. That's earned. That's worn by those who carried a rifle when the rest of us slept safe. Murmurs rose. The crowd's eyes settled on Claire. She remained motionless, her face unreadable. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't wanted recognition. Yet here it was, laid bare in front of them all. Riker's bravado faltered further. He leaned closer to her, trying to reclaim ground. Tell him, sweetheart. Tell him you're nothing but a barmaid in a borrowed story. For the first time, Claire's voice rose above a whisper. Calm, clear, steady. I served. The words cut through the tavern like a blade. A hush fell again. Riker's face flushed, anger and fear mingling. He had meant to humiliate. Instead, he had uncovered something heavier than his threats. From the corner, another voice came. This one trembling but certain. Donovan. Claire Donovan. Fallujah. 1st Battalion. Heads turned. An older man in a weathered jacket stepped forward, his eyes shining with recognition. He tapped the side of his temple, as if pulling the memory free. I remember the reports. She pulled 3 men out under fire. Silver Star, if I recall. The tavern breathed as one. Riker's sneer collapsed. His men no longer grinned. Even Murphy, clutching the bar for balance, looked at Claire as if seeing her for the first time. The balance of the room had shifted. Claire had not raised a hand, yet the ground beneath Riker seemed to tilt. As the crowd's awe deepened, Claire's thoughts slipped back, unbidden, to the deserts where the scars and medals were earned, and to the friends who never returned. The tavern blurred. For Claire, the dim yellow lights above gave way to a blazing white sky. The smell of spilled beer became the stench of diesel and burning sand. Fallujah. She remembered the sound before anything else. The thunder of mortar fire, the hiss of rounds snapping overhead, dust choking the air, the screams of men caught in the open. Corporal Ruiz had been the first to fall. She could still see his hand reaching out from the rubble, fingers clawing at nothing. Claire had dragged him free, blood soaking through her uniform, her breath tearing in short bursts. She had kept pulling until her body threatened to collapse. Then came Chun, barely 20, the youngest in the squad. His eyes had been wide, disbelieving even as shrapnel cut through him. She remembered pressing her hand against the wound, whispering lies he wanted to believe. You'll make it. You'll be fine. But she had known better. Her wrist still bore the scar from that day, a jagged mark where hot metal had torn into her skin. She felt it now, the old ache sparking as though the memory lived in the flesh. She had lived. They had not. That was the weight she carried into every quiet morning since. That was why she had folded away her uniform, locked the medals and commendations into a box, and buried them beneath years of silence. The tavern's sounds returned slowly. A cough, the creak of a chair, the hush of a crowd waiting for her to move, to speak, to confirm what the older veteran had said. Claire blinked. She was back behind Murphy's counter, the torn shirt hanging loose, her tattoo visible to all. She inhaled, steadying herself. But the memory did not leave. Ruiz's face, Chin's breath fading. They were with her still, as they always would be. Riker shifted his weight. He was trying to find his footing again, to claw back the control he had lost. So what? He snapped, though his voice carried less strength now. That was years ago. Doesn't change what happens tonight. Claire turned her eyes to him. Calm. Cold. The kind of look that had seen men fall apart under pressure more violent than his threats. She did not answer him. Her silence said enough. The crowd leaned in, caught between reverence and fear. They had seen the scars on her wrist. They had heard the truth carried in a single veteran's memory. They could feel the weight she bore without her ever needing to speak of it. Then, from the back of the tavern, a chair scraped. Another figure rose, one who knew her name, her past, and her worth. The tavern's tension deepened as another chair scraped across the floorboards. Every head turned. From the corner, an older man rose. He was broad-shouldered though bent with age, his white hair cropped close, his face lined by sun and war. His coat was a faded green field jacket, worn so thin at the elbows it looked almost transparent. He carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who had long ago stopped needing to prove anything. Murphy's eyes widened. Colonel Hayes, he whispered. The name drifted across the room like a spark catching dry grass. Many recognized it. Some only felt the weight behind it, even if they didn't know why. Hayes walked slowly toward the bar, his boots steady against the creaking wood. He stopped beside Claire. His gaze rested on her torn collar, the ink revealed beneath. For a long breath, he said nothing. Then, his voice, rough but certain, "Staff Sergeant Donovan." "I'll be damned." The words cracked open the silence. Claire's jaw tightened. She hadn't heard that title in years. She hadn't wanted to. But spoken aloud, here in this room, it brought 100 memories rushing back. Riker blinked, confused, glancing from Hayes to Claire. "Staff Sergeant," he scoffed, though his tone faltered. "She's a waitress." Hayes turned his head slowly, fixing him with the calm stare of a man who had once commanded lives in battle. "She's a decorated Marine. I read the reports myself. She held her fire team together when others broke. Men are alive because of her. Men who would have died." The crowd murmured again. The fishermen, the dock workers, the truckers, all saw Claire with new eyes. She had been among them all this time, unseen, unrecognized. Claire said nothing. Her eyes lowered, as if the weight of Hayes's words pressed too hard. She hadn't wanted his validation. She hadn't wanted any of this. But the tide had turned. Hayes laid a hand lightly on the bar. "This is not your ground, son," he said to Riker, his tone flat, unshakable. "You don't threaten her. You don't threaten this place." The words landed heavy. Riker shifted, his men uneasy behind him. Claire finally raised her eyes. Her silence was no longer retreat. It was decision. The room had changed. She was no longer hiding. And Riker no longer stood against a barmaid. He stood against something older, stronger, and recognized. Claire stepped forward now, her voice calm but cutting, ready to turn the weight of truth into a warning Riker could not ignore. Claire stepped out from behind the counter. Her torn shirt hung loose, the Marine Corps tattoo fully visible now. The crowd parted without a word. She did not rush. She did not posture. She simply moved forward with the deliberate calm of someone who had walked into danger before and survived it. Riker tried to mask his unease with bravado. "Don't think a tattoo and some old man story scare me," he barked. His voice carried volume, but not conviction. His men behind him shifted their feet, the cracks in their confidence showing. Claire stopped just a pace away. Her voice was quiet, but every ear in the tavern caught it. "You walk into a place you don't understand. You threaten people you've never earned the right to face. And you mistake silence for weakness." The words hung in the air, sharp as glass. Riker smirked, though sweat glistened at his temple. "And what happens if I don't back down? You gonna fight me? In front of your little crowd?" Claire did not blink. Her reply was measured. "If I wanted you gone, you'd already be outside. Face down." She let that settle, then added, softer still, "But I don't need to prove anything to you." The crowd leaned in, silent, their breath held. She took one small step closer. "What you should think about," she said, "is how many people in this town now know your name, your face, your threats. When the sheriff hears what you tried here tonight, you'll be answering to more than me." A murmur rippled through the crowd. She wasn't shouting. She wasn't swinging fists. She was turning the very weight of the room, of the witnesses, against him. Hayes, arms folded behind her, spoke low but firm. "Listen to her, son. You're standing in the wrong place, at the wrong time. And you're already beaten." Riker's smirk cracked. His men looked at each other, their swagger dissolved. Claire straightened her shoulders, her voice steady, final. "You'll walk out that door now. You'll tell the rest of your crew this place isn't yours to touch. And you'll remember it's not fear keeping you out. It's respect you've never earned." The tavern held its breath. For a long moment, Riker stood frozen. Then his eyes broke from hers. He muttered a curse, turned sharply, and shoved through the door. His men followed quickly, their boots clattering against the wood. The silence they left behind was heavier than the noise they'd brought. Claire exhaled, her hands still steady. She had not sought the fight, but it had found her. Now, with the bar safe, a new question stirred inside her. What came next? The door shut behind Riker with a hollow thud. His departure left an echo, as though the walls themselves had been holding their breath. Slowly, the tavern began to stir. Men shifted in their chairs. Glasses were lifted again. But the atmosphere was different, charged, reverent, unsteady. Claire remained standing in the open space, the torn shirt hanging from her shoulders, her tattoo plain to see. She had not asked for this exposure. She had not wanted it. Yet here it was, undeniable. Murphy cleared his throat behind the bar. Claire, his voice wavered, rough from years of whiskey and smoke. I thank you. He set a glass down too hard, the rim chipping, his hands trembling. She gave him a small nod, but no words. Gratitude felt misplaced. She hadn't acted for thanks. She had acted because someone had to. Colonel Hayes remained beside her, arms crossed, eyes steady on the door. He spoke low, almost only for her. You could have broken him. You chose not to. Claire's gaze stayed on the floorboards. I didn't come here to fight, Colonel. Hayes gave a faint smile, tired but approving. No, but you stood. That matters more. The tavern's regulars began whispering, some in awe, some in shame for having stayed silent. The older men, those with their own service long behind them, straightened in their chairs. They understood the weight of what had just taken place. Claire turned back toward the bar, but her steps were slower now, heavier with thought. She had spent years hiding, keeping her head down, pouring drinks and cleaning tables. It had been safe that way, invisible, but tonight had stripped that life bare. She could feel the eyes on her back, not of fear, but of expectation. Something had shifted. She picked up the fallen tray from the floor. The dents in the metal caught the light. Her reflection stared back at her, tired eyes, a scarred wrist, the ink of the core marking her forever. In that reflection, she found no escape, only a truth she had long buried. She set the tray on the bar and spoke quietly, more to herself than to anyone else. I'm not running anymore. Not from my past. Not from this. Murphy looked at her, puzzled, but Hayes understood. His faint nod carried the weight of approval. The tavern would be different now. Not just a bar. Not just a refuge for weary men. It would be something more, because she was no longer hiding. Outside, the night carried on, but inside Murphy's, people looked at Claire differently, and she felt the burden of their gaze settle onto her shoulders. The tavern had returned to its rhythm, but not quite. Glasses clinked, boots shuffled against wood, the jukebox hummed softly again. Yet under it all lay a silence not spoken, a shift everyone could feel. Claire sat on a stool at the far end of the bar, her shirt still torn, shoulders squared but not stiff. She sipped water, though the tremor in her hands was gone. Calm had returned to her body, even as her mind lingered on darker roads. People watched her differently now. No longer the quiet barmaid with a soft voice. They saw the tattoo, the scar on her wrist, the stillness that spoke of something beyond ordinary strength. A fisherman named Tom, grizzled and weather-beaten, leaned toward his neighbor and whispered, I thought she was just passing through. Never guessed, he trailed off, shaking his head. On the opposite side, two younger dockhands stared openly, their eyes caught between admiration and unease. One murmured. She faced Riker like he was nothing, didn't even raise a hand. Claire heard the words, though she did not react. She had lived long enough to know that respect and curiosity could feel like shackles just as heavy as suspicion. Murphy polished the counter near her. His hands were steadier now, but his voice carried awe when he said, I'll never forget tonight, Claire. Not ever. She gave him the smallest smile, though it faded quickly. It's over, Murphy. Let it stay over. But she knew it wasn't over. Not really. She could feel the change. People wouldn't see her the same way again. They would want stories. They would want explanations. They would want to make her into something she had long resisted, a figure to admire, a hero to uphold. And that thought unsettled her more than Riker's threats ever had. She looked down at her hands, scarred but steady. They had taken lives. They had saved lives. And now they poured drinks and cleared tables. She had chosen this quiet life because it demanded nothing but presence. No glory, no memory. But tonight, the quiet life had cracked. At the edge of her vision, a boy of maybe 17 lingered near the bar's doorway, thin shoulders hunched, cap pulled low. He looked at her the way young men sometimes do when they see strength they long for but cannot name. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. He swallowed hard, then stepped closer. His voice was soft, hesitant, but his words carried the weight of admiration and questions Claire had tried her whole life to avoid. The boy stood before her, nervous but steady, his cap twisted in his hands. The tavern's noise softened, as though even the walls leaned closer to hear. Claire looked at him, calm, waiting. She had learned long ago that silence often drew out truths people were afraid to voice. "I know who you are," he said, his voice cracking at the edges. "Not just what Hayes said. I read about you." Her brow tightened. "Read what?" The boy swallowed, his eyes darting to the floor before finding courage again. "My uncle, he was there. Fallujah. He said there was a woman, a Marine, who pulled men out when the streets were fire and steel. He said she carried them when no one else could." His hands clenched the cap. He said without her, he wouldn't have come home. A chill passed through her. She had never wanted her name carried in stories. She had fought to bury the memories, not to see them rise in strangers' voices. "What's your uncle's name?" she asked quietly. "Ruiz," the boy said. "Corporal Ruiz. He doesn't talk about it much, but when he does, he always mentions you. Said you saved him." The room shifted again. The fishermen, the dockhands, Murphy, all leaned in at the sound of the name. Ruiz. A name she had whispered once while dragging a broken body across sand and stone. Claire's chest tightened. She saw his face again in the dust, in the chaos, his hand reaching, blood heavy in her grip. She had pulled him, yes, but she had not saved him. He had lived in spite of her, not because of her. That was the truth she carried. She met the boy's gaze. His eyes were wide, hopeful, desperate. He wanted her to claim the story, to take the weight and turn it into light. But Claire spoke evenly, her tone carved from honesty. "Your uncle saved himself. I was just there." The boy shook his head. "That's not what he says. He calls you the reason he made it back. Says he owes you everything." Claire exhaled, slow and steady, her scarred wrist turning the cap of her glass. She had spent years trying to silence ghosts, and here they were, walking into Murphy's in the form of a boy who wanted to believe in her. She did not answer right away. The room stayed hushed, the question hanging, waiting to see if she would accept the role thrust upon her, or reject it once more. Claire's response, measured and heavy, would reveal more about her than the stories ever had. The boy's words lingered in the air, clinging like smoke. His uncle's name, Ruiz, echoed in her memory with the sound of gunfire and grit, with the weight of blood soaking through her sleeves. Claire set her glass down, the hollow ring of it against the bar louder than it should have been. She looked at the boy, steady, her voice calm but edged with steel. "People like your uncle," she said, "they don't owe me a damn thing. Don't let him tell you different." The boy frowned, confused. "But he said." She cut him off, gently but firmly. He said what he needed to. Maybe to make sense of it. Maybe to give the nightmare a shape that didn't crush him. "But listen to me." She leaned in, her eyes locking onto his with a weight that silenced the entire tavern. Nobody walks out of hell because someone else carried them. They walk out because they choose not to stop crawling. Your uncle made that choice. He lived because he refused to die. Don't ever take that from him by giving it to me." The boy's lips parted, but no words came. His breath caught in his chest. Colonel Hayes watched her with quiet intensity, his jaw tight but respectful. He understood. He had seen men and women fight against the chains of memory, refusing to let stories define them. Murphy, behind the bar, swallowed hard, the rag in his hand forgotten. The fishermen and dockhands stared down into their glasses, unsettled by the sharp truth of her words. Claire leaned back, her tone softening, though her eyes did not. Heroes are just people someone else needs them to be. The truth's uglier. Messier, I did what I had to, and I carry what came with it. That's all. The boy's shoulders slumped. He nodded slowly, though the conflict still showed in his face, the longing to believe in her, and the weight of her refusal. After a long silence, he whispered, I wanted to say thank you, even if you don't want it." Claire let the words hang. She did not take them, did not reject them. She simply allowed them to drift away, like smoke through the rafters. The boy stepped back, eyes downcast, and slipped quietly toward the door. The tavern exhaled with him, the air shifting once more. Claire sat still, her face unreadable, but inside her chest the old ache returned. Part guilt, part defiance, part something nameless she could never shake. Hayes, still nearby, chose this moment to speak, not as a commander, but as a man who had carried the same weight and knew what it cost. The tavern had grown quiet again, the echoes of the boy's words still hanging in the rafters. Claire stared at the door he'd left through, her jaw set, her glass untouched. Colonel Hayes stepped closer, slow and deliberate, his boots soft against the floorboards. He did not fill the silence quickly. He let it sit, heavy, before breaking it with a voice low and steady. "You handled that right," he said. Claire didn't look at him. "Did I?" Because it felt like ripping the hope out of his hands. Hayes leaned on the bar beside her, his arms folded. "You told him the truth. That's more than most men ever give." She finally turned her eyes on him, sharp, questioning. "And what good is truth, Colonel? It doesn't heal, doesn't quiet the nights, doesn't stop a boy from looking for heroes where there aren't any." Hayes's weathered face softened, the lines deepening around his eyes. "No, it doesn't. But lies don't hold up, not when the years start to pile on. Better he learns it now." Her hand traced the rim of her glass, restless. "I don't want to be remembered. Not for what I did. Not for what I couldn't do." Hayes studied her a long moment. When he spoke, his words were gentle but unflinching. "You don't get to choose that, Claire. None of us do. Men remember what they need. Sometimes it's truth, sometimes it's myth. Doesn't matter what you want. It matters what they carry." She shook her head, bitter. "I never asked for it." "No one ever does," Hayes replied simply. He paused, then added, "You think I asked to be remembered as the man who signed orders that sent boys to their deaths? I live with it anyway. You live with your weight, I live with mine. That's the cost of being in the fight." Her shoulders slumped slightly. She had no answer for that, because she knew he was right. Hayes straightened, his voice firmer now. "You've spent years hiding, thinking you could put it all down. But tonight proves it, you can't. It's in you, whether you want it or not. And people will keep seeing it, keep feeling it. Best you figure out what you're going to do with that, before it does the choosing for you." Claire stared into her glass, his words cutting deeper than any blade. She didn't nod, didn't argue. She just sat in silence, knowing he had spoken a truth she could not run from. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying with it the sound of voices. Riker's crew had not gone far. Trouble was waiting beyond the tavern's door. The night outside pressed close against the windows, the glass trembling faintly with the rhythm of the wind. Murphy's neon sign flickered, sputtering, throwing shadows across the tavern walls. The quiet inside was brittle, ready to splinter. Claire sat still, her glass untouched, but her ears caught the faint murmur of voices beyond the door. Not laughter, not casual talk, low tones, clipped, heavy with anger. Hayes shifted slightly, his hand brushing the edge of the bar. He had heard it too. His eyes met hers, steady, no words needed. Murphy moved toward the window, his steps hesitant, wiping his palms on his apron as if sweat had pooled there. He parted the curtain with 2 fingers. His breath caught. "They're out there," he whispered. "Riker's boys. 4, maybe 5. Just waiting." The dockhand stiffened, muttering curses. One of the fishermen set his glass down hard, the sound sharp as a shot. Fear flickered through the room, but no one moved for the door. Claire finally spoke, her voice calm but cutting through the tension. "They'll wait until they think we're weak. Until the lights go out, or the door's left unlocked." Murphy turned toward her, his face pale. "What do we do?" Hayes answered before she could. "We hold steady. No panic. They want fear. That's their first weapon." Claire rose from her stool, the torn sleeve brushing against her arm, her tattoo stark in the dim light. The room quieted with her movement, all eyes turning. She felt it again, that pull of expectation, the weight of people wanting her to be something. "They'll come for me," she said simply. "Not for the rest of you. Riker needs to prove he wasn't broken tonight." Murphy's face tightened. "So we let them take you?" "No, not in my place." Claire gave him a faint, weary smile. "I didn't say that." She walked toward the door, each step measured, the wood creaking beneath her boots. She paused with her hand near the latch, not touching it yet, listening. The murmurs outside grew clearer, snatches of anger, the scrape of boots on gravel, the metallic click of something being readied. Hayes's voice came low but firm. Claire. She looked back at him. You don't have to do this alone. For a moment, she almost let herself believe him. Almost. But then she shook her head, the faintest hint of resolve hardening in her expression. This isn't about me anymore, she said. It's about all of us. And they need to learn that. With that, she reached for the latch, ready to step into the storm gathering just beyond the tavern's door. The tavern door groaned as Claire pushed it open, the hinges carrying a weight they had not borne in years. Cold air swept in, stinging her skin, tugging at the torn edges of her shirt. The night smelled of salt and oil, the harbor just beyond the street. 5 men stood in the glow of the weak street lamp. Riker was not among them, but his shadow was etched into the way they carried themselves, fists clenched, jaws tight, eyes glinting with borrowed fury. One stepped forward, broad-shouldered, his coat collar pulled high. His lip curled. You humiliated him. Nobody does that to Riker, and walks away. Claire's boots touched gravel as she descended the steps, the tavern door closing behind her with a hollow thud. She stopped at the edge of the lamplight, her face calm, unreadable. You're here because he's too broken to face me himself, she said evenly. The man stiffened, his pride stung. We're here to finish what he started. From the shadows near the wall, another muttered, She doesn't look like much. Claire heard the lie in his voice. They had seen her stillness inside Murphy's. They had felt it even through the walls. Go home, she told them, her voice carrying like a blade drawn slow. Tonight's already over. The leader spat onto the gravel. Not until you bleed. The scrape of metal rang out. Knives, short and crude, glinting in the lamplight. One of them swung a chain, the links rattling like a serpent. Claire didn't flinch. She took one slow step forward, her shadow stretching long across the dirt. If you come closer, you won't leave standing. That's not a threat, it's a fact. Behind her, through the tavern's curtain, faces watched. Hayes. Murphy. The boy who had confessed had returned, peering in silence. Every eye fixed on her. The men shifted uneasily, the bravado cracking just enough to show the doubt beneath. They had numbers, but numbers don't matter when the air itself has turned against you. The leader snarled, raising his blade. You don't scare me. Claire tilted her head, her eyes narrowing just slightly. Then you haven't been paying attention. The street went still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. And then, like a match to dry tinder, it began, boots crunching, steel flashing, the storm breaking loose beneath the flickering light. The fight outside Murphy's would not be a brawl. It would be something else entirely, a demonstration of what restraint looks like when pressed to its limits. The first man lunged, his knife flashing clumsy under the street lamp. Claire shifted half a step, caught his wrist, and twisted. The blade clattered to the gravel before he even realized his arm was broken. No roar, no scream. Just the dull crunch of bone and the thud of steel. The second came fast with the chain. She ducked low, the links whistling past her ear, and drove her shoulder into his ribs. Air burst from his lungs as he collapsed to the ground, gasping. Another rushed in, wild with fear disguised as anger. She pivoted, her elbows snapping against his jaw. He spun sideways and hit the dirt, teeth scattering like coins. The last two hesitated, their bravado draining as quickly as the fight had begun. They circled, eyes darting from their fallen men to the woman standing calm, unmarked, her breath steady. Claire didn't chase. She didn't advance. She simply stood, her body loose, her eyes sharp. Waiting. You don't want this, she told them. Her voice wasn't raised. It didn't need to be. One of them spat, the gesture trembling more than defiant. He swung anyway, a sloppy arc meant to scare. Claire caught his wrist, twisted him down, and planted his face into the gravel with a crack that silenced him. The last man froze. His knife hung loose in his grip, his knuckles white. He looked at her, at the broken bodies of his friends, at the tavern door where shadows watched from behind the curtain. Her voice cut through the night. Run. For a heartbeat, he didn't move. Then his nerve snapped. The knife dropped. His boots hammered the gravel as he fled into the dark, leaving the others groaning where they lay. Silence fell again, broken only by the ragged breathing of the men on the ground. Claire stood still in the lamplight, her chest rising and falling, her hands steady. Behind the tavern's curtain, the onlookers had seen everything. The fisherman, Murphy, the boy, even Hayes, his face unreadable, watching her like a man who understood both the skill and the burden it carried. Claire didn't look back at them. She crouched, picked up one of the dropped blades, and tossed it into the shadows. Then she straightened and walked to the door, stepping over the groaning bodies as if they were nothing more than stones on a path. When she opened the door, the tavern's warmth spilled out. She stepped inside without a word, the storm she carried folding neatly back into silence. Inside, the weight of what they had witnessed settled heavy on everyone, none heavier than the boy, whose eyes burned with awe and something deeper. The tavern air felt different when Claire stepped back inside. The hush wasn't fear anymore. It was reverence, though she refused to acknowledge it. She walked to her stool, sat, and picked up her glass as if nothing had happened outside. Her hand was steady. She didn't drink. The boy near the back hadn't moved since the door closed. His face was pale, his eyes wide, fixed on her with a mixture of awe and something harder, something sharper. He had seen men fight before, dock brawls, petty squabbles that spilled onto the wharf, but this was no brawl. This was control, precision, inevitability. Murphy busied himself with the rag again, scrubbing the same spot until it shone. Hayes leaned against the wall, his arms folded, his gaze following Claire with a soldier's recognition. The boy finally moved. He stood, his chair scraping the floor, and every head turned toward him. His voice trembled at first, but grew steadier as the words came. You could have killed them." Claire didn't look at him. She swirled the liquid in her glass, the faint clink of ice the only answer. "But you didn't," he pressed. "You stopped them. You made them stop." She sighed softly and set the glass down. "They stopped themselves. Fear does most of the work." The boy shook his head, frustration in his tone. "No, that wasn't fear. That was you. The way you moved, the way you didn't." His voice caught, but he forced it steady again. "That's what strength looks like. That's what I want to be." A murmur rippled through the tavern. Hayes's eyes narrowed, studying the boy with a soldier's caution. Murphy opened his mouth to speak, but thought better of it. Claire finally looked up. Her gaze fixed him in place. "You don't want this," she said flatly. "Not the scars. Not the nights that don't end. Not the weight that never leaves your chest. You want peace. Don't confuse the two." But the boy's jaw set, his eyes bright with something unshaken. Peace doesn't come by itself. Somebody has to stand up first. For a moment, silence stretched taut across the room. Claire stared at him, and in his defiance she saw the shadow of a younger self. Before the wars, before the blood, before she learned what standing up really cost. She looked away, unable or unwilling to answer. Hayes stepped forward, his voice breaking the tension, directed not at Claire this time, but at the boy, testing the fire that had just sparked. The boy's words hung in the tavern, bold and unshaken. Hayes pushed off the wall, boots heavy on the floorboards, and came to stand between him and Claire. He studied the boy, eyes narrowing the way a smith eyes a blade fresh from the forge. Not hostile, measuring. "You've got fire," Hayes said, his voice low, gravelly. "That's clear enough. But fire alone burns out quick if it's not tempered." The boy swallowed, standing straighter under the weight of the colonel's stare. "I don't care. I won't just sit and watch anymore." Hayes circled him slowly, like a drill sergeant too old to bark, but not too old to test. "You think you saw strength tonight? You saw control. Years of it. You think you want that? Then tell me, how many nights are you willing to lose? How many graves are you willing to carry on your back?" The boy's mouth tightened, but he didn't falter. "As many as it takes." A few of the dockhands muttered, uneasy at the sharpness in his tone. Claire, watching from her stool, felt something twist in her chest. Anger, regret, maybe both. Hayes stopped in front of him, his face inches away. His voice dropped quieter, sharper. "That's the wrong answer. This life isn't about how many graves you can count. It's about how many you can prevent. Get that wrong, and you're no better than the men bleeding outside. The boy blinked, the words landing harder than he expected. His defiance faltered for the first time, confusion creeping in at the edges. Hayes straightened, his gaze still locked on him. Strength without discipline is just another kind of weakness. If you want to stand, you'd better learn the difference. The room stayed silent. Even Murphy had stopped wiping the bar. Finally, Hayes turned to Claire. He's looking to you, whether you like it or not. You can push him away all you want, but he'll keep coming back. Boys like him always do. Claire's jaw tightened. She met Hayes's eyes, then the boy's. For a heartbeat, she saw not him, but a ghost of herself. Young, certain, blind to the weight waiting on the other side. Her voice, when it came, was soft but sharp. You want to learn? Then learn first to listen. Not to me. To him. She nodded toward Hayes. Because if you can't, you'll never survive me. The boy's eyes flickered between them. Fear, respect, and a determination that refused to die. Hayes gave a faint nod. The test not finished, but only begun, as the tavern braced for what the night still had left to bring. The tavern didn't return to its old rhythm. No laughter, no clinking of mugs. Only the quiet scrape of chairs, the uneasy shuffle of boots, the muted breathing of men who had seen too much. Murphy lit another lamp, though it was hardly needed. Everyone knew the darkness outside was heavier than the night itself. Hayes had reclaimed his spot by the wall, silent, arms folded, his eyes drifting between Claire and the boy. He was thinking ahead, always ahead, the way men do who've survived too many ambushes. The boy hadn't sat down. He lingered near the back, restless, shoulders taut with something between pride and doubt. Claire had said nothing more to him. She stared at her glass, untouched, her reflection broken by the faint ripples. Outside, the groans of the men left in the street had gone quiet. Whether they crawled away or were gathered up, no one could say. But the absence of sound was worse than noise. It meant the night wasn't finished. One of the fishermen finally spoke, his voice hushed but trembling. They'll be back. With more. Riker won't let this go. Another muttered. Then what do we do? Pull up here till morning? Wait for the docks to burn. Murphy slammed the rag down, his patience cracking. This is my place. My father built it, and his before him. I won't see it torn apart by Riker or his pack of cowards. The room bristled, fear colliding with pride. Some of the men looked toward the door, some toward Claire. She finally set her glass down and spoke, her voice level, calm as still water. He's right. Riker won't let this go. But neither will I. All eyes fixed on her. She didn't look at them, only at the door. Hayes broke the silence. You'll need more than defiance to outlast the night. Claire's gaze flicked to him, then to the boy. Maybe, but defiance is where it starts. The boy straightened, hope sparking in his face, but Hayes caught it with a glare that pinned him in place. Don't mistake words for readiness, he warned. The lamps hissed softly, their flames wavering as the wind pressed against the shutters. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, then went silent. Claire stood, slow, deliberate. The tavern's floor creaked under her boots. It's going to be a long night, she said. Best you all decide now if you mean to stand or to run. No one answered. But in the quiet, choices began to take root. Outside, footsteps stirred in the dark again, softer this time, more deliberate, proof the night had more to give. The footsteps came first, measured, steady, too controlled to be drunk or reckless. Not the ragged scuffle of dockhands looking for trouble. This was different. The tavern's lamps flickered as though they sensed it too. The men inside froze, mugs half lifted, chairs stilled. Even Murphy's hands went still on the bar. Claire moved to the window. She drew the curtain back, just enough to see. The street outside was slick with mist, the lamplight bleeding pale across the gravel. The bodies that had fallen earlier were gone. No blood, no knives, no groans. As if the fight had never happened. And in their place stood silhouettes. Not 5 this time. Twice that number. Maybe more, the fog swallowing their edges. At their front, broad shoulders, a limp dragging one leg, Riker. His face was swollen, one eye puffed half shut, but his grin carried all the venom his fists could not. He leaned on a cane, though the way he gripped it made clear it was no simple crutch. Steel capped the end, gleaming faint in the lamplight. Claire let the curtain fall. He's here. The words spread through the room like cold water. The fishermen shifted uneasily, some gripping mugs like weapons, others glancing toward the back door. The boy stood straighter, his jaw tightening, fire still unburned. Hayes stepped forward, his voice quiet but carrying. He's not just here for you. He's here to make a point. To everyone watching. Murphy cursed under his breath. Then we can't let him through those doors. The tavern creaked as the wind pressed harder against it, the shutters rattling like bones. Outside, Riker's voice rose, muffled but sharp enough to pierce the walls. Come out, Claire. You think you made a fool of me? You think you can put me down and walk away? Tonight, everyone learns who really holds this harbor. His men cheered, the sound rolling like waves against the tavern walls. Claire didn't move. She stood in the center of the room, still as stone. Finally she spoke, her voice quieter than Riker's but sharper, cutting through the noise like a blade. Then let them learn. The boy's eyes lit, but Hayes shot him a look that kept him rooted. Claire walked to the door, her hand resting lightly on the wood. For a moment, the tavern held its breath. Then the hinges groaned as the door swung open again, spilling light into the mist. The street filled with silence as Claire stepped out once more, Riker waiting with his army at his back. The mist curled low across the street, swallowing sound, swallowing distance. Claire stepped into it, the tavern's lights spilling a narrow path behind her. The door creaked shut at her back, leaving her alone in the lamplight. Riker stood at the center of his men, one hand on the cane, the other flexing at his side. His grin was all teeth and malice, but his eyes betrayed the bruise of humiliation that no cane could steady. You've got a talent for spectacle, he called, his voice rough but carrying. My men said you were quick, said you were cold. But me? He tapped the cane against the gravel, the metallic ring sharp. I'm not like them. Claire said nothing. She walked forward until she stood 10 paces away. Still as ever. Silent as ever. Riker sneered. You break a few bones and think that makes you untouchable? You don't understand how things work here. This harbor belongs to me. These men belong to me. And tonight, you'll belong to me too, or what's left of you will. The cheer from his followers was forced, ragged, more bark than conviction. They'd seen what she could do. Their noise was for him, not themselves. Claire's voice cut through the mist, low and even. You're not here for the harbor. Not tonight. You're here to prove to yourself you're still feared. Riker's grin faltered for just a moment. Then he laughed, loud and coarse. Feared? I don't need to prove a thing. Fear walks ahead of me, wherever I go. He limped a step closer, planting the cane hard into the dirt. But let's give them a show. You and me. No knives, no men. Just us. Winner takes the harbor. Loser. He lifted the cane, the steel tip glinting. Loser doesn't walk away. The men behind him roared, though unease still colored their voices. Claire didn't move, didn't blink. Her silence pressed harder than any answer. From the tavern window, the boy's face appeared between the curtains, eyes wide, hard in his throat. Beside him, Hayes's gaze was cold and steady, already measuring the ground, the odds, the exits. Finally, Claire spoke. If you want me, Riker, step forward. Leave your men behind. Stand where they can see what happens when a man like you meets someone who doesn't flinch. The cheer from his crew wavered. Their eyes turned to him now, waiting, measuring whether their leader's shadow was as long as he claimed. Riker's grip tightened on the cane. The mist seemed to hold its breath. And then, with a growl more animal than man, Riker stepped forward. The fog pressed close, swallowing sound. Only the faint hiss of lanterns carried from the tavern behind Claire. Riker stepped forward, cane in hand, his limp more pronounced now that bravado alone had to carry him. His men hung back, forming a ragged semicircle, eager to see blood but unwilling to move first. Claire stood her ground. No stance, no flourish. Just stillness, her greatest weapon. Riker spat into the dirt. I'll break you slow. Let him all watch what happens when someone forgets their place. He lunged, the cane stabbing low toward her ribs. She shifted aside with the smallest motion, his strike glancing air. Her hand snapped to his wrist, twisting. The steel tip of the cane bit into gravel as he grunted in pain. She released, stepping back, letting him feel his failure. The men jeered nervously, their laughter brittle. Riker's pride burned hotter than the bruise on his arm. He swung the cane wide this time, a brutal arc aimed for her skull. Claire ducked, her fist driving into his gut. The breath left him in a choking rasp. But Riker was bigger, heavier. He staggered, then brought his knee up and drove his shoulder forward, slamming her back a step. His cane whipped around, catching her across the shoulder with a crack that echoed through the fog. The boy flinched at the window, gripping the sill until his knuckles whitened. Hayes didn't move, but his eyes never blinked. Claire straightened, her breath steady despite the blow. She rolled her shoulder once, as if shaking off an inconvenience rather than pain. Riker snarled, "You think you're better than me?" She answered only with motion. A feint left, a pivot right. Then her elbow cracked across his jaw. He reeled, stumbling, blood spraying from his lip. Before he could recover, she stepped inside his guard. One hand seized his cane, the other his collar. She wrenched downward, spinning him with his own weight, and the steel tip of the cane clattered against stone. He landed hard on his knees, gasping. The mist caught his breath, ragged and shallow. His men shifted uneasily. Claire pressed the cane's steel tip under his chin, forcing his head back. Her eyes were calm. "Cold. You wanted them to watch," she said. "So let them." Riker's gaze darted, desperate, but found no ally in the faces behind him. Fear had replaced loyalty. For a long, heavy second, silence ruled the street. Then Riker spat again, bloodied and broken. "Do it. Finish it." Claire's grip on the cane tightened. But she didn't move, not yet. What she chose in that moment would decide not just Riker's fate, but the harbor's. The steel tip of the cane trembled against Riker's throat, not from Claire's hand, but from the silence pressing in on all sides. Every man behind him leaned forward, waiting to see how far she would go. Riker's swollen face twisted, his pride screaming louder than the pain in his body. "Go on," he spat. "Kill me. Show them you're no different." The boy's breath caught at the window. Hayes's eyes narrowed, the faintest shake of his head betraying what he already understood. This was not about one man anymore. It was about the harbor, about what kind of order would follow this night. Claire stared at Riker. Her hand was steady. Her voice was colder than the fog. "No," she said. "You don't deserve an ending." She stepped back, tossing the cane aside. It skittered across the cobblestones and landed with a hollow ring. Riker collapsed forward onto his hands, choking on the weight of his own humiliation. The silence of his men cracked into murmurs, confused, uneasy, but louder by the second. They had watched him beaten, stripped of power, denied even the dignity of death. And in that denial, they saw something they hadn't expected, mercy sharpened into judgment. Claire turned her back on him. The choice was final, absolute. "Leave," she said to the crowd. "All of you. This harbor isn't his anymore. Not tonight. Not ever again." The words struck harder than any fist. Men glanced at each other, some stepping back, others outright retreating into the mist. The first to run broke the tension, and soon the rest followed, scattering like dogs denied a master. Riker remained on the ground, alone, his breaths ragged, his grip clawing at the dirt as though it could hold him together. He looked smaller now, deflated, a shadow without substance. Claire didn't watch him crawl. She walked to the tavern door and pushed it open. Inside, the fishermen rose as one, their fear mingling with awe. Murphy's face was pale, his hands shaking against the bar. The boy's eyes shone, torn between relief and reverence. Hayes, still by the window, gave a small nod, the only recognition he would ever offer. Claire spoke, her tone flat but final. "It's done. For now." Murphy swallowed hard. You saved this place." She shook her head. "No. You saved it, by standing here. By not running." The boy stepped forward, desperate words spilling out. "Teach me. Please. I can learn. I'll do anything." Claire silenced him with a glance. Not cruel, but firm. "You already learned tonight. Strength isn't about fists. It's about standing when the ground shakes. Remember that." He froze, nodding, though disappointment flickered in his eyes. Hayes finally pushed off the wall, his voice low. The harbor's quiet for now, but it won't stay that way. Not unless people remember what they saw. Claire met his gaze. Neither smiled. Neither needed to. She adjusted her coat, the night air still clinging to her like a second skin. Then let them remember. Without another word, she stepped back into the fog. The tavern doors swung shut behind her, muffling the voices inside. The harbor was silent. For the first time in a long while, it was not the silence of fear, but of possibility. And in that silence, Claire disappeared into the mist, leaving only the weight of what she had done and what she had refused to do. Thank you for following this story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and share your thoughts below. Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. Stay tuned for more immersive stories.